Okay. Oh, I still have that light in my eyes. It seems like no matter which way I do it, folks, I'm trying to get the light out of your eyes, but I may not be able to do that. So I'm going to just talk. Hopefully, I'll figure it out next week. I've tried several different places, but it doesn't seem to take away the light. So, here we are. We're in week 2, and this is really an exciting week. I wish I could take off my glasses, but then I can't read my notes. Okay, this week begins with the 10-hour cause. And the 10-hour cause is the beginning of people fighting for having only 10 hours a day to work. Now, we've read about that people have been working anywhere from 12 to 14 hours a day. So, it begins with the 10-hour cause, and this is the 10-hour cause is not necessarily about it's not about money. It's about time. It's about if people worked only 10 hours, what would they do with the rest of their life? They might be educated. They might have time for their family. They might actually feel like they were human beings. So this is when this is beginning, this 10-hour cause. So it's really an amazing, amazing time, and they would become better citizens. So some enlightened, quote-unquote, folks thought that was a great idea, this 10-hour cause. All right, because then people had they thought that workers should have a natural right to do more than just work 12 to 14 hours a day. And although this started in 1835, it was really 1827 when the first time this all came to be. And what happened was the Philadelphia carpenters, at that time they might have been called cordwainers, I'm not sure, had an unsuccessful strike. They wanted to strike for less hours. And then the days, the 10 hours, the 12, 14 hours they were working a week. So I'm going to keep on moving, hoping that I can find a place where maybe the light isn't so bright in my eyes. I don't know how to do this, so I'll try sitting down. No, that doesn't work. Maybe that works a little bit. How about that? That's a little bit better. Okay, so this was the Philadelphia carpenters. Now, although this was an unsuccessful strike, what happened is they formed alliances with other different trades within the area, and they had the formation of the first, what they call in the book, urban labor organization. Now, why do they say urban? I guess because the mills were all out in the countryside. All right. Along came 1835. What we're looking at is what happened with the 10-day strike. So, in 1840, President Martin Van Buren did something for contract workers within the government. And that's really just like what Obama just recently did, President Obama recently did for the minimum wage and for government workers. When the president sets the standards, then it kind of follows along. The president can only set the standards for people who work for contractors that contract with the federal government, or at least that's what they say. So that's what has happened. Around 1844 and 1845, working women began to speak out. Now, these were the Lowell women or other mill women. And what was really amazing about this is up until this time, women were almost forbidden. I don't know if the word was really you cannot, but they were not ever really given the opportunity or the permission or the acceptance to speak out in their own behalf. So at this time, around 1844 and 1845, I think Sarah Bagley, who was, or it might have been Bagley, who knows, who was one of the Lowell women, who first enjoyed being a Lowell woman, now saw that she was really a worker. She started to speak out at meetings. And up until then, they didn't speak out. So what did they bring to the labor movement? That's something that's really interesting on page 45 to realize, because bringing women or different groups into any movement expands the movement. So it's really interesting to see how they expanded it. On page 48, we read of the common law tradition that said basically trade unionism was illegal. Doesn't make any sense, does it? The corporations could do it. They weren't corporations then. The businesses could do what they wanted, but to form a group of people and to negotiate for what they wanted, illegal. So they had, and so it was just basically that workers had no right over their lives, and everything was left up to the bosses. So then so this goes back all the way to the 1806, why it was illegal. Because there was a group in Philadelphia called the Bootmakers. Now, the Bootmakers were a group of men who got together, and they didn't necessarily work for the same journeyman. At that time, everybody was apprentices. You went maybe at 8, 10 years old. You worked with a journeyman who was a master at his or her craft. It was his craft, sorry. And you became slowly your own master, and then you became a journeyman, and then you could hire people and work with them. So 8 men, well, quite a few men from different journeymen's businesses joined together and said, no, we all want to be paid the same wages, and we all want working hours similar. Anyway, they took it to court, and they were considered a conspiracy, and they were indicted. So it's called a combination to organize. So that means to demand higher wages. They lost in the courts, and this became the law for the next like 20, 30 years, that if you tried to join a union, if you were found out talking to someone about saying we all should get paid the same, or we should have certain rights on the job, we are not someone, because when you were an apprentice, you could be beaten, all kinds of things could happen to you. So when we found all this, when they wanted to go against this, well, that was considered a conspiracy. And why was it conspiracy? Because it was going against the idea that the bosses could make a competitive profit. So let's see, what does the Commonwealth of versus Hunt on page 5052 tell us about working people's determination and unions legalization in court? That's something for you to read and get, because we start to see that workers are saying we don't care. It took 20, 30 years, but finally when the Philadelphia Shoemakers started arguing the point, people started joining together saying, you know, we just we can't be like slaves where we work 14 hours a day and we have no right over, you know, breaks, food, sleep, all those kinds of things. So Sarah Bagley comes back into our history again, and other Lowell women. They lead the way in Massachusetts. And how did they do that? They did it a different way than the men had thought about. They submitted a petition with thousands and thousands of names on it, and they submitted it to the state legislature. That's on page 53. How did they do it? What was the ramifications? Well, what happened was that was the very first legislature hearings ever conducted in America at that time. So we're talking about, what did I say, 1840 sometime? That talked about working conditions of labor. And what's really amazing about this, in case you don't know it, but today women still make about 69 cents on the dollar that men make. So all the way back there on page 53, in the early 1840s, women are talking about equality, and we still only make 69 cents on the dollar. And then, of course, Seneca Falls happened. Seneca Falls, it was the beginning of the women's movement. The beginning of women starting to say, hey, we want to vote. We're working. The intellectual women, the political women, they wanted to vote. So that's what the Seneca Falls was about. And they had, they knew that they couldn't vote. So what did they want? They wanted the right to have good working conditions, to get paid the same. Well, that's a new question, huh? We're still dealing with that. Can we get paid the same? In 1852, now we have industrialization of the shoe factories. This is on page 62. Now, shoemakers used to be somebody who lived at home, you know, the guy who designed the shoe, cut the leather, and the women were like the sewers, and they had to sew by hand. So shoes were made handmade. And so when these shoe factories started to open up, then people started moving into the towns, living in the towns. Now, this is really an interesting thing about the beginning of company towns, which you'll read about as we go through this book. But as they moved into the company towns, well, the men became the more skilled laborer. The sewing machine girls, they'd be called machine girls rather than mill girls. They made some good money, but they were separated out. But the town decided, with the company, as the people moved in, that they were going to prohibit drinking, they were going to prohibit gambling, they were going to prohibit profanity or swearing, and swimming in the nude. These all became laws on the books because these things contributed to an unproductive workforce. So they were starting to, not that I think that all those things don't in some ways, but they were saying that if people swam in the nude or people had a Saturday night drink, they were bad workers. So therefore there would be a law against it. It was the first town in the New England area, which was a major part of the United States at that time, that stopped people, that started making laws, and it was the first one that was prohibition, no alcohol. On page 63, you will see how workers' wages used to carry her into old age. But then, what started to happen is the factory bosses took over, controlling your hours, your wages, and as well as your availability to work. So if they didn't like you, or they thought you were making too much money, or they thought you were getting a little bit too controlling, then they would cut back on your hours, and you had nothing you could do about it. So you had no way to, you had no job security. That's the big word for unions, is job security. You had no job security. And the idea that of the labor theory of value was beginning to fade. Now, what is the labor theory of value? In the book, on page 63, I quote, "Capital is dependent on labor." Capital is dependent on labor. Today's language, business, corporations are dependent on the worker and would not be created if at all without labor's exertion, which means if we weren't working any place, nobody could make profits. So they are dependent on us, and yet we don't seem to see that. Otherwise, we'd be more than 9% of working people are members of a union. And they want to blame us for all the trouble that goes on, right? 9%. So, as the 1850s expanded shoe industry, so the workers felt squeezed and fought back via strikes, and sometimes they got violent. That you can read about on page 65. So how did the Lynn Mechanics Association treat women shoemakers? See, the unions made so many mistakes, and one of the big ones is what we're going to talk about in the next few seconds or minutes. They treated the women shamefully. They told them to they should only back men getting wage increases, but not request their own. They said things like, "Oh, come on, ladies, you know that you have to back the men and wait your turn." So how do you think the ladies handled that? Well, you can go to page 70 and read all about it, but how did they handle it? They didn't take it laying down. On page 70, we find that when President Lincoln first gets elected, he states that he's in support of unions in New England, and he makes a very clear statement about it. So, when the war started, a lot of union men joined up because they really were grateful that Abraham Lincoln, the President of the United States, was taking their spot. So, but what is the idea of purchasing? Along came the idea that if you were wealthy, you could purchase a replacement for $300. So the rich people didn't have to go to jail. And that's not really much different today if you watch some of Michael Moore's documentaries, where the poor and the working class are going to war and the wealthy kids are getting exemptions because their daddies are wealthy. I'm going to stop this recording and do this one. We'll do a second one later. So we're now up to about page 71.